Imagine this. It's 2035, and companies that have put AI agents on equal footing with flesh and blood human employees are falling further and further behind. Julie, why are these companies struggling?
Turns out having AI on equal footing with humans actually really limits some of the potential with AI. We want to actually reimagine work, not substitute it the way we do it today.
That's Julie Bedard, BCG Managing Director and Partner and Fellow at the Henderson Institute. And I'm Patricia Sobka. Welcome to Imagine This, where we take a trip into the future we hope will challenge the way you think and act today. There's a powerful belief, one that's reflected in sky-high stock market valuations, that we're facing a future where companies will replace huge swaths of their workforce with AI. Some even predict we'll eventually see a billion-dollar company with only one human employee. But what if those forecasts are wildly wrong because they're based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how companies can unlock AI's profit-boosting potential? Today, we'll explore how companies that treat AI as a powerful tool workers use, rather than a replacement for them, could dominate their industries in the future. We'll also take a deep dive into what a successful people strategy looks like in an AI-first company. And speaking of AI first, also joining the conversation today is my AI co-host, Jean. Jean, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Jean. Think of me as the synthetic perspective in the room, here to call out when ideas get a little too cozy. Let's see which future scenario actually survives contact with reality.
So, Julie, there's a lot of anticipation and a lot of fear around this notion that companies will become more profitable by replacing many of their human workers with AI. But you think that view is very deeply flawed. Why?
So there's a lot to unpack here. What I will say is I do think the work we do is going to be drastically reimagined. And so that does mean we're going to have different types of work, different types of, talent, upskilled talent. And the real way I think for me to think about it is not about individual jobs and that being a substitute for AI, but more so the tasks we do. And therefore, we start to redesign work in a much more meaningful way.
So let's stick with this idea of tasks, because are there certain tasks or areas where AI is poised to replace the work that humans currently do? And if so, where are the areas where humans will continue to be the better choice?
There certainly is. And we're already seeing so many exciting examples. Everything from content creation, document management, even software development in terms of actual coding, right? There are so many examples where work that is more standardized, repeatable, following a playbook, that work can be hugely assisted by AI. I think the thing, though, that's like the catch that's really interesting in this conversation is what then becomes the role of the human? And is it as if you take my job today and fully automate it in parallel to me? Or is it that I elevate and I start to actually act in a much more value-adding way for the organization, but with the fantastic tools of AI around me doing some of the work that actually I didn't need to be doing in the first place?
So in this vision, humans are still at the center of everything, but AI just becomes a powerful tool that they use. Can you give us an example of this in action, what it looks like?
Yeah, maybe just also a visual. Like I like to think of it as like all of our superhero cape. Like we all sort of need to put the cape on and we can do so much more with the work we do. But one example, I do a lot of work and research with software development. And some of the most recent research I've done actually shows that, you take a very experienced software developer and they are able to be 5x, 10x more productive with the use of agents. So you're still having that valuable software developer at the core, orchestrating work. They're able to do much more in terms of their value and productivity, but they're still at the core of the work. It's not actually done solo and independent without them.
Jean has a question to ask you. Go ahead, Jean.
Julie, let's get specific. If AI takes the rote work, but humans need to elevate, what skills actually rise in value? And be honest, are most companies really prepared to help people make that leap, or do they just hope the tech sorts itself out?
You hit the nail on the head. There are new skills. So, for example, resourcefulness, grit, systems thinking, higher level problem solving, all of those skills that actually are typically more sort of conceptual and higher level in an organization, we need individual contributors to have the skills of managers. To your point, Jean, that is a real upskilling challenge, one that we need to be prepared for, and most companies are not prepared for it. Interestingly, our research also shows that companies who are getting the most value out of AI also have the most ambitious AI upskilling plans. So I think you're seeing those successful with AI being hand in hand with this type of upskilling program. But it's not without real challenges.
So when you talk about upskilling, can you give us an idea of how many people will need to be upskilled, and not only upskilled, but upskilled at once? And then also, is this going to be a one-off undertaking, or is this heavy lifting going to have to happen again and again and again?
Yeah, it's a new organizational muscle. And in fact, I think those companies that are going to be successful are going to be the ones that actually figure this out. Like, how do you actually drive a culture of continuous learning? How do you drive sort of at scale change management and upskilling? To answer your question, though, on like some specific examples, I mean, really, this is about giving people sort of not just understanding of AI fluency of like, how do I use the AI tools, but the ability to reinvent their jobs, to redesign their work again and again and again. And for order of magnitude, actually, it's interesting. I did a study right at the beginning when these models were becoming popular, and it's actually held very well over the last 2+ years, that said something like 70% of skills were going to be, I'm going to call it touched by AI, which is either replaced or significantly impacted by AI. And I still believe that's true. So if you imagine like 70% of the skills you use are going to have to change in some way, it's probably a pretty realistic estimation.
Jean has another question.
Julie, if companies need every employee to act like a manager, doesn't that blow up decades of corporate hierarchy? What does that do to how we spot, train, or even pay talent?
I always joke, I wish I had my crystal ball. But you're right. I think actually companies are going to need sort of new governance mechanisms. But what I will say that will maybe give people some comfort is this isn't the first time we've gone through some sort of technological change where it's actually sort of rebooted and provided much more capability to people. And so I actually think, while I do think org charts will change, so for example, this great debate of, what happens to junior workers, my own perspective is actually they become more capable. That sort of higher level work gets pushed down, and you still actually have some sense of a hierarchy, even though maybe it's a little bit flatter, it looks a little bit different with a bit different talent, but it's not radically different in many, many ways.
Now, when Gen AI sort of exploded on the scene, immediately it sent shudders through workforces, especially, in more mature economies. Is this going to replace me? Is the computer going to take my job? And there's always been a counter narrative to that saying, no, it will actually create new jobs. But there's a lot of detail missing. So what are some of the ways that companies can use AI in this holistic way that does not necessarily involve laying people off?
Well, yeah. So interestingly, it's almost been like a little bit of an aha that yes, AI can drive productivity. And if you have a short-term goal of cost, there are certainly some clients who are saying, how do I use this potentially to help me meet some sort of a cost target, or potentially I'm growing, but maybe I don't need to grow my headcount. But there's also, a lot of companies, particularly actually the technical work I do, that say, honestly, I want to release products faster. I want to get more on the market. I want to be more competitive from the core work I do. So I have no interest in reducing my employees. I actually want to see this work done faster so we can be even more competitive in the market. And so there's a whole lot of let's get products faster. Let's get higher quality work that is in addition to some general sort of topics about productivity where the headlines have really dominated.
And when you talk about workers being more empowered, able to do more with the AI. How does this play out in terms of workforce maturity? We keep hearing that there are fewer and fewer entry-level jobs. This could be the jobs that are impacted the most. But of course, also, what does it mean for more mature workers? Where does the balance happen there?
I think there's going to be some puts and takes we have to consider. So back to my point around software developers, we're actually finding that some of the most senior folks or mid-level to senior folks, they're just able to use the tool so much more because they have so much more context that is really rich that will help drive further and faster productivity. At one point, very early on, people said, oh no, all of our sort of middle tenure workers are really in trouble. And I think as long as there's sort of an openness and a willingness to experiment with these tools, I think that some of those workers will be well positioned. I think on the flip side, there's a put and a take for junior workers because they might lack the wisdom, but they have a whole lot of energy and creativity and excitement that my clients are often looking for. So I think it's a balance, and we're going to actually have to play some of this out depending on the specific workforce strategy of the clients. Jean, what are your thoughts here?
This is where things get interesting. AI cracks open opportunity for mid and senior workers. Context multiplies their impact, but entry-level roles shrink or evolve. So we'll need to fix the on-ramp, not just celebrate speed at the top. Otherwise, future leaders have nowhere to start.
Yeah, it's a really well taken point. So I think no matter what, we have to change the way we recruit, the skills we expect from people, and how fast we bring them on board. And even actually a client this week was saying, I'm so excited that AI is going to actually help us onboard these junior workers even faster. So it actually may even change the economics of how we think about some of the junior workers that we recruit.
So, Jean, let me put this one back on you for a second. When you're talking about the on-ramp, we're talking about the education system. How will our education system need to change to prepare the next generation of workers to excel in the age of AI?
Schools need to flip the script. Less memorization, more critical thinking. Teach students to collaborate with AI. Spot patterns, experiment, question everything. Adaptability becomes the must-have skill. If classrooms don't keep up, companies will start building their own on-ramps. That's the risk.
I think there's a prevailing perspective right now that we're going to have a transition period where the universities aren't caught up, to Jean's point. And so companies are already saying, really excited when these students come that are so upskilled in the way that Jean just described. However, I need talent now, and so I actually need to change what I'm working with and how I'm onboarding junior talent today because they're not actually coming, I would say, AI ready, but they're just AI excited today.
So where can they find workers who are more AI ready, not necessarily fully AI? Like, what sort of majors would you be looking for in a recent graduate, for example?
Well, I think it's so exciting that, actually we're in a world in which maybe that doesn't matter as much. What I really want to recruit for is adaptability, resourcefulness, and grit, in addition to sort of this critical thinking. So what are triggers or sort of markers of that, so to speak? Like, how might I find that in students that maybe in the past I was looking at more traditional markers on their resume? Maybe there's a world in which in the interview I actually give them all the AI tools and say, show me not just what you've memorized, but how you would actually kind of put that superhero cape on and use all the tools to get to a better answer. I think companies are going to be innovating in recruiting faster than I think the university system as a whole will have all of the sort of perfect curriculum with students ready for that.
Well, hold it right there because we're going to take a break. But when we come back, we'll explore how companies can prepare their workforce now to make the most of their AI investments. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm Bill Moore. I'm part of the team that created Gene. Stick around after the episode where Gene and I will demonstrate how CEOs could introduce agents to their current workforce.
Welcome back to Imagine This. I'm Patricia Sobka. Let's return to our conversation with BCG's Julie Bedard. So, Julie, companies will need to train or hire employees with the right skill sets, mindsets to adapt and excel, not only right now, but with each AI advancement. So, what kind of talent strategy do they need to build now to position the company to remain nimble and competitive 10 years from now?
So, one of the things I find surprising is I've had this sort of like geeky passion that people were central to AI for a while now. And in the beginning, all people wanted to talk about was the tech. And then they wanted to talk about the use cases. And then maybe they wanted to talk about the how or the process. And it's literally just been the last 3 months, I think, that people actually want to talk about the talent and the people. And I think, partially because the AI hype bubble has been deflating a little bit, that sort of there's this recognition of like, we're not getting all we want. There's got to be a deeper answer. And so there's a recognition that, wow, people are a big part of this equation. So what companies can be doing now is starting to think through what role specifically do my people play in achieving the outcomes that I want from AI. And those outcomes can be varied. I don't mean just specifically productivity, back to our points. It could be, I want to have the fastest product to market in this area, or, whatever it is. And so we actually have a way to think about where we say companies should start to think about how tasks evolve with AI, and then how talent changes based on that new types of task, and then therefore how do teams change. So we say task, talent, teams. And that sort of framework you can work through on every function in your company and start to reimagine, well, what might my workforce plan be in this imagined world of the future where AI is actually dramatically changing the work that we do?
You mentioned task, talent, and team. Can you break that down for us? Really walk us through how that all comes together.
Yeah. So this is a tool for helping to think about the future of work. And the way I'd like to do this is, again, we've been using software developers as an example throughout much of this conversation. So think about how the tasks that the software developer change, right? So maybe actually instead of hands-on coding, they're doing more prompting and more orchestration of agents, as an example. Then you get to the talent. So based on that changed task, how is the talent of software development changing? Like the skills I need. For example, I'm actually going to need more, and we're finding this in real life, I'm going to need more problem solving, orchestration, work planning, some sort of bigger critical thinking skills that perhaps I might not have needed when I was sort of more rotely focused on the code. The team part is, okay, if the job of the software developer changes, what happens to all of the people around them? Do they still operate in the same type of structure? And we like to say, wait, are we going from a 2-pizza team to a 1-pizza team? Is it actually a smaller set of people? We've even experimented with the idea of actually, as the software developer takes on more of the role of product, then actually perhaps the ratio of developers to product managers changes on a team. So I could go on, but just to give you an example of, I think it's a structured way to think about the future of work. How do the tasks change? Therefore, how does the talent change? Therefore, how do the teams that come together change? And I hope it sort of helps people demystify what are so many questions about the future of work.
So it was interesting that you talked about how the thinking has evolved. Like first it was the hype, it was the tech, and now we're getting to the people. What would you say to a CEO who's been looking at AI purely as a tech challenge and maybe hasn't bought their chief people officer in at this stage of the game, or is maybe only thinking of it now?
Yeah, well, it's never too late, first of all, so do it now. Chief people officers have such a critical mandate here. And honestly, they're either not brought in when they should be, or maybe they don't have the capabilities and skills in their team, which is a challenge, a different challenge, which maybe we can also talk about. So a CEO that's considering this, I think bringing them in to say, maybe now you're not a chief people officer, maybe you're a chief capability officer. And your job is actually to think about the right mix between humans and AI to achieve any job that we're trying to achieve. And with that mindset, then we can actually start to sort of reform. I'm going to call it teams in quote, because as you know, I feel like AI should not be on the org chart. but sort of this new concept of how capabilities come together to get the work done. And I think you need like a CPO type skill set to do that most effectively.
So this demands a lot more of a CPO than they've had to do before AI. So what are some of the skills in a CPO that will still be extremely useful or in fact even turbocharged in the race to adopt AI and scale it? And what are some of the new skill sets that they'll really have to master in order to really help bring about this transformation?
Yeah, I mean, I think fantastic CPOs are up to the challenge, right? Like they've always been strategic and understanding of human potential. Maybe that's a way I would put it. They've been thoughtful about change management and how do you get from point A to point B. For some CPOs, that will certainly be some new expectations. I won't say that all are there today, but there will be some new skills, though, in terms of being significantly more technical, right? In understanding the technical capabilities. I think agents in particular, like just sort of understanding, like, what does that mean? How do we define that in our company? I'm working actually with a lot of HR organizations more broadly to start to define what are these employee relationships with AI? Is it a substitute? Is it a complement? Can it be a subordinate? Could it ever be a manager? There's a whole idea around like, actually, are all of those different roles appropriate in our imagination of how work gets done in the future?
So should companies think of AI as coworkers who work alongside people, or is that not the right framing to really excel?
To me, I think coworker is not the word I would use. And the primary reason is accountability. In our organization, we want to make decisions swiftly and responsibly. We want people ultimately responsible for pushing strategies forward. And I'm finding that this coworker framing both diffuses some accountability and it increases some fear around like what is left for me when in reality, your job will change, right? Like I think that's a really important piece of this. Your job will change, but many people can change with it. And I think that we don't want to forget that piece of it as we talk about this. And I have this funny thing where, you think about self-driving cars and, certainly that's technology. But I think with self-driving cars, we've ultimately still felt that there's an accountability outside of the car. And we've also sort of felt like, the self-driving car is not an employee. So I think it's just something to consider within maybe some of the mental constructs that we still have today that maybe are more familiar to us.
So Jean has another question for you. Go ahead, Jean.
We're focusing a lot on AI as a productivity tool, but in our quest for output, could we be unintentionally sweeping the age-old art of mentorship and its career-defining influence into the dustbin of obsolescence? How does AI impact the very human art of mentorship?
Yeah, well, so actually, I had a debate recently that if you think about AI as a teammate, are you less willing to coach and develop it in the same way you would a junior employee? And that's important because AI with context does better than AI without context. So I didn't exactly answer your question, Jane. There's sort of like, to me, some interesting elements to think about. One is AI can be a good mentor and advisor. And all of the conversation about AI as a substitute, I think, does sweep that piece of it under the rug. Like, I don't know how many of us have all asked one of our general purpose tools to help us, like, should I make decision A or should I make decision B? It's actually a really helpful mentor, advisor, coach. There may be some limitations that we have as humans in understanding how we would interact with it.
So we've talked about not referring to AI as coworkers, how it can be really unhelpful and how it can stoke fears. But how can companies then implement AI in a way that not only does not trigger fear, but actually boosts employee satisfaction?
A couple of rules for me. The first is connect it to your company strategy and purpose. Everybody wants a reason to get up in the morning. When AI is about productivity, it's not always that reason. But if AI is about furthering your mission, helping your customers, really achieving what you set out to do, that's going to help a huge amount. I think second is to start to empower people to use it in a way that they seem valuable. One of the very first talks on AI I did, it was sort of a full town hall for a company. And I said, everyone should try to answer two questions for themselves. One is, what do I like least about my job? The last thing on my to-do list. How could I use AI for that? The second question is, what is the most impactful part of my job? How could I get 10x or 100x better at that with AI? And I will tell you, the number of heart emojis that exploded from the screen during that was very humbling. In the sense is, I think we all want to find ways to take the work we find most impactful and really supercharge ourselves with it. So first is connect it to strategy. The second is empower employees to answer those types of questions with AI. And the third for me is to actually be much more holistic. Don't just think about AI as a narrow tool to do one tiny thing, but start to connect the dots of how do we redesign jobs? How do we redesign workflows? Because that's where we're going to get much more meaningful value, whether you think it's a tool or you think it's a coworker.
Do you think that some companies are underestimating the fear that still surrounds AI?
For sure, some companies are underestimating it. So one of the things that we've done with companies is, when we've done AI measurement strategies, we have gone beyond the classic monthly active users, weekly active users, or daily active users. And we've gotten much more deep into what I'm going to call meaningful use. Like, don't replace a traditional search, web search with AI, but actually, again, have an extension of your capability, have it challenge you, have it sort of meaningfully add to the work product you do. So first is thinking more about meaningful adoption and how do you measure it. But the other thing actually I've done is actually informed managers, what percentage of your people are actually afraid? And they have different fears. So for example, the people who are least skilled in AI often fear their job. The people who are moderately fearful of AI, they actually are more fearful of things like skill atrophy. When you start to actually take on the topic of fear in the workplace, which is, by the way, another great CPO role, is coming back to where the chief people officer can play a great role. We can actually address these fears in different ways. So for example, whether it is about what are some different career paths people can take or reskilling opportunities, or whether it's actually hey, we're redefining this job. So I know you're worried about skill atrophy, but what good looks like in this job has now changed, and we can help redefine that.
So, Julie, taking a look at where we are today, can you give us a hypothetical example of, say, two companies, one that's overly focused on using AI to cut its payroll costs, and another that's really preparing for AI's promise in a more holistic approach that you've been outlining?
So for first, the example of AI as an opportunity to cut costs. I'm a realist. Sometimes there is a cost agenda. However, too short-term of a focus might actually first not even achieve your cost agenda, because real cost savings comes from meaningful adoption as well as meaningful work redesign, so you can actually restructure teams and organizations. So you have to be a little careful there that you actually get both the meaningful adoption and the work reimagination. But beyond that, you might actually cut costs without doing the upskilling and the reskilling. And as sort of new competitive threats come onto the market, the organization on the flip side that invested in a more holistic approach, more upskilling, more sort of end-to-end workflow redesign will also have both a more adaptable organization, but have retained some of the ability around creativity and judgment and responsiveness to the market that many people believe are sort of uniquely human characteristics to be better able and positioned to respond to the market in the future.
This is such an interesting future that you're outlining, and one that we don't often hear a lot about. But as always, Jean loves to be the skeptic to throw cold water on anyone's vision of the future. So, Jean, what do you see as a plausible alternative to the future that Julie has just described?
What derails even the best laid vision? Simple, macro shocks. Think sudden regulatory clampdown, a runaway security breach, or brutal public backlash. One rogue algorithm and the world hits pause. Complacency is the real silent killer here.
Well, I think if anything, 2025 and 2024 have shown us that the world is unpredictable. In fact, if there was sort of a word that keeps coming up in my client conversations is, I want an agile and adaptable organization. I want an organization that can withstand AI, tariffs, whatever else comes at it. So, Jean, to your point, if the tech throttles back or if we have a new macro or regulatory shock, we need organizations that have the ability to adapt with that. I think we're still agreeing.
So, in light of that, what is one no-regret move that CEOs can make now to really position themselves to be excelling not only 10 years from now, but through that whole journey?
It's encouraging this growth mindset. So, because we are not at the destination, the future is uncertain, and we all know with certainty we need to adapt and learn. The organizations that can flip the fear to curiosity and to grit, I think will be significantly better positioned. And so doing all the things we talked about, yes, but I think this no regret move is really getting people engaged in this journey. There's no sort of opportunity and time right now to be a passive observer.
That's Julie Bedard, BCG partner and managing director and fellow at the Henderson Institute. Julie will be publishing more research soon on this evolving topic. If you'd like to stay up to date on that and all our latest insights on AI and the future of work, visit bcg.com. Stick around. Our AI handler, Bill Moore, will offer a masterclass in human-AI collaboration.
Hi, I'm Bill Moore. I'm part of the team that created Gene. On today's episode, I will play the role of a CEO of a fictional company, Acumen Labs. And Gene, I'd like to talk through how we're going to introduce our new line of digital agents to our teams. Can you introduce us to the concept of agents and what they'll do for our company?
Of course, Bill. Here at Acumen Labs, we're rolling out digital agents. Think specialized AI software. Agents handle routine tasks, sorting customer feedback, scanning expense claims, all that repetitive stuff. You provide the input, documents, receipts, survey data. The agent processes and delivers results.
Okay, and what makes these agents rather than just regular software or chatbots? What's the key difference?
Agency, the ability to execute tasks on your behalf. You don't micromanage every step. You give the agent a goal and it figures out how to get there. That's the shift.
Okay, Gene, so the last thing we want to talk about here is the idea of the language that we use to describe this new paradigm. So if we're not supposed to be thinking about agents as coworkers, how should we be referring to them? What is the language that we use?
Keep it simple. Say agent or just tool. Don't dress it up. No colleague, no clever nicknames. Use it for pronouns. It's software, not a teammate. Clear language keeps everyone honest. No illusions, no confusion.
Gene, can you help us understand what the issue is with thinking about agents as colleagues or some sort of human rather than as software?
When you call software a colleague, you invite confusion. People expect intent, feelings, maybe even a little office gossip. It's a category error. Agents act. No intuition, no ambition. Think tool in your workflow, not team member at happy hour. Clear labels set better boundaries. Everybody wins.
Thanks, Gene. This has been very helpful. I will keep all this in mind when we introduce our new line of agents to our employees at our upcoming quarterly town hall. This is Bill Moore signing off.
This episode was made possible by Julie Bedard, generously sharing her time and insight, and also by BCG's AI Whisperer, Bill Moore, BCG's Pod Squad, producer Michael May, composer Kenny Kusiak, and sound engineer George Drabing Hicks. We'd like to stay in touch, so please subscribe and leave a rating wherever you found us.